I'm Lena. I was 31 when I realized I had planned a wedding I wasn't even invited to, my mother's second marriage, a lavish affair at the edge of a vineyard in Saxony. I'd coordinated every detail, the ivory lilies flown in from Amsterdam, the hand calligraphed menus, the string quartet that played Debussy by the fountain at exactly 3005 p.m. I'd arranged it all. And yet, when the photographer asked who the family was for the formal shots, my mother looked right through me and said, "Just the immediate family, please." I stood there holding a bouquet of discarded eucalyptus stems, the ones that didn't make the final centerpiece arrangements. My hands were stained green. My name was not called. You know that feeling when the floor drops out from under you but you're still standing? That's what it felt like. I smiled. I nodded. I told the photographer I'd help gather the right people. I even adjusted Clara's veil. It wasn't always like this. When I was 16, I held my mother's hand through a year of surgeries after her car accident. I dropped out of debate to manage the hospital bills when we couldn't afford a lawyer. I was the one who made her laugh during the worst days of the divorce. When her ex-husband, my father, vanished with the remainder of our savings, it was me, not some fairy tale savior, who kept the lights on with a part-time job at a grocery store and forged her signature to defer mortgage payments. Then came Peter. Tall, polished, a man with a voice like polished oak. My mother met him at a fundraiser. I remember the way she looked at him that night, like the air itself bent around his presence. And with Peter came Clara, his daughter. 8 years younger than me, all braces and ballet buns. At first, I welcomed her. Taught her how to braid her hair, shared my hoodies, bought her tampons with my tips because she was too embarrassed to ask. It started small, the shift. A missed dinner here, a forgotten birthday there. "Clara's been having a hard week, Lena. I'll make it up to you, promise." Then it became tradition. Every holiday, every family vacation, every photo. My place moved just a little more to the side until, eventually, I wasn't in frame at all. And yet, when she called me to help plan the wedding, I said yes. Not because I owed her. Not even because I wanted to prove something. I think part of me still believed that if I made it beautiful enough, thoughtful enough, she'd see me again. I restored her vintage wedding dress in secret. Took it to my flat in Berlin where I worked nights in my friend's tailoring shop. I added lace from our great-grandmother's veil. Sewed a golden band into the lining with a dedication embroidered in cursive, "For my mother." I was there. And I remain. It was meant to be a surprise. A gift. A symbol of something deeper than forgiveness. But as I stood there, watching her pull Clara into the center of the photo, I realized something chilling. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been removed. I waited until the last vendor had packed their things before I let myself breathe. The rented tent came down like a deflated lung, and the caterers carried out the last trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres miniature beet tartlets Clara had insisted on. Because she saw them once on Instagram. Clara. She was draped across a white lounge chair like she'd just returned from war. Still in her silk robe embroidered with "Bride's Daughter" in blush thread. My mother sat beside her, holding a champagne flute and stroking her hair like she was the one who had just married Peter. I kept to the sidelines, sweeping up stray petals, answering questions from the cleanup crew, staying useful. I was always useful. When the rehearsal dinner started, I slipped into the back of the hall. I had my speech printed, folded in thirds, tucked into the back pocket of my skirt. Not a long one. Just a few words about second chances, about love after heartbreak. A gentle nudge toward connection. But as soon as I stepped toward the microphone, my mother rose from her seat and clinked her glass. "I just want to say a quick thank you," she beamed, arm curled around Clara's waist. "To all of you who made this weekend possible. Especially Clara. My rock through all of this. I couldn't have done it without her." The room applauded. Clara giggled and whispered something into my mother's ear, and they both laughed softly, like a private joke had been shared. I was still holding the folded paper. No one asked me to speak. I quietly sat down, folding the paper smaller, smaller, until it was a hard square I could crush in my palm. Later that night, I found myself in the prep room behind the ceremony stage. It smelled like candle wax and roses. I had come to check on the dress. My dress. The one I had restored for her. It hung silently from a mannequin. The lace glowed under the overhead lights, delicate and whisper-thin. But something was off. The golden ribbon, the one I had hand-stitched into the hem, was gone. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted the hem slowly, looking for the dedication I had sewn. Nothing. Instead, a pale pink ribbon wrapped the waist, perfectly color-matched to Clara's robe. I turned toward the waste bin, heart already sinking. There it was. The golden band. Crumpled, wrinkled, my stitches undone with precise, cold fingers. She hadn't forgotten it. She had removed it. No note. No explanation. I reached into the bin, pulled the ribbon out, and held it like something dead. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I walked to the edge of the empty stage. The golden band clenched in my fist. The lights were dim, the room silent. It was the first time I felt the edges of my rage, and the first time I realized it had been growing all along. I stayed in the shadows during the ceremony. There wasn't a seat for me, not officially. The planner, a girl I trained 6 months ago, offered me a folding chair near the back with a hesitant smile, as if she wasn't sure if I was family or staff. I waved her off, told her I preferred to stand. The sun poured gold over the vineyard lawn as my mother walked down the aisle. She looked radiant, not because of the dress, though it fit her like memory, but because she was glowing with something else, something like triumph. I noticed the pink ribbon immediately. It shimmered in the light, soft and subtle. Harmless even. No one here would know what it replaced. No one here would see what was missing. Clara walked just behind her, holding the train, beaming like it was her day. Peter waited at the altar, smiling like the prize had finally arrived. I watched from the side, hands crossed, nails digging into my palms. Then the speeches began. Peter said his vows, something about resilience and new beginnings, and I could almost stomach it until my mother took the microphone. She spoke gently, her voice full of practiced emotion. She thanked the guests, the staff, the weather gods for blessing the day. Then she turned toward Clara. "And to my daughter," she said, eyes softening. "You've shown me what love looks like every single day. You've been my real partner through this journey. My second chance. My heart." There was a collective sigh from the crowd. Some clapped. Some dabbed at tears. I stared straight ahead, unmoving, not a single glance in my direction, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased. My heart didn't break. It calcified. I stepped away before the kiss, before the applause. I walked the gravel path behind the guest tent, the sound of celebration growing faint behind me. I found the service corridor, the one lined with crates of glassware and staff smoking cigarettes between shifts. I leaned against the wall, the golden band still tucked in my pocket. It was warm now, molded to the shape of my body, like it had tried to stay close. I looked at my reflection in the catering door's glass pane. My cheeks were pale, my lips pressed tight, my eyes too wide. I didn't look like someone who had just pulled off the perfect wedding. I looked like someone standing at the edge of something dangerous. And then I thought, maybe that's what I needed. Not another quiet exit. Not another swallowed feeling. Maybe this time, I stay. I didn't go home that night. I stayed at the venue, long after the last car pulled away and the music faded into the trees. I told the cleaning crew I'd do a final walkthrough, made up something about a misplaced gift box. But the truth is, I wasn't ready to leave. There's a strange kind of silence that settles after a celebration. A hollow ring that clings to the air, like the walls themselves remember the joy and wonder where you weren't welcome. I walked through that silence in heels. I couldn't feel anymore, my hands brushing the backs of empty chairs. The head table was still cluttered with half-empty glasses and lipstick-stained napkins. Clara's floral robe was draped over the back of a chair, like a throne abandoned. I touched it, then let my hand drop. It didn't belong to me. None of this did. When I reached the dressing room, I paused at the threshold. The dress was gone. Of course it was. But her shoes were still there. The pink heels Clara had picked out for her. Not my mother's style, not her size even, but she wore them anyway because Clara had insisted. And because my mother said yes to Clara the way she used to say yes to me. Before, I sat on the velvet bench where I'd spent hours hemming that gown, finger by finger, stitch by stitch. I had poured so much of myself into that dress, into her. And now, I wasn't even a footnote. They called me the helper. I heard it earlier from a bridesmaid I didn't know. Is she like the wedding planner's assistant or something? No. I was the architect. But I wasn't on the blueprint anymore. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the golden ribbon. It was still creased from the trash bin, but my stitches held. My name was there, tucked into the dedication. Not just for my mother. No. I signed it. I wanted her to know. I wanted her to remember. And she threw it away like it was nothing. I stood, clutching the ribbon like a match. Outside the window, fairy lights still twinkled in the vineyard. Perfect, serene, untouched by the rot underneath. That's when I made the decision. Not out of impulse, not even out of spite, but clarity. They could all pretend I was never part of this. They could edit me out of every photo, every story, every speech. But I was there, and I was done being silent. Tomorrow, I'd make sure they remembered. I didn't sleep. I went home long enough to shower, pull the pins from my hair, and change into something that didn't reek of roses and resentment. Then I sat on my floor, bare legs folded, the golden ribbon stretched across my knees. I traced the lettering with my fingertip, the thread catching slightly where I'd tied off the final knot. My signature was small, discreet, but permanent, a whisper meant to last, and she threw it away like a used tissue. Around 4 a.m., I made a decision. Not the kind you second guess, not the kind you ever come back from. I ironed the ribbon flat, pressed it between pages of an old design portfolio, and waited for dawn. When the light broke through my kitchen window, soft and dusty, I started packing. The venue opened at 8. I was there by 7:30. The main ballroom was already buzzing with leftover energy staff clearing linens, caterers returning crates. Clara's voice drifted from the dressing room, shrill and fluttery. She was still in celebration mode, laughing about some joke from the night before. Did you see Uncle Jurgen's dance moves? God. He looked like he was possessed by disco. I stood outside the room for a beat, hand on the doorknob, then turned and walked to the hall. The reception space had been transformed overnight, a kind of aftermath glow hanging in the air. I found the microphone on the stage, disconnected but still in place, like a relic. I reconnected it. The click of the power switch was louder than I expected. Final. Sharp. People turned. Not many were there yet. Just the stragglers, the early staff, a few family members sipping coffee and stealing leftover pastries. I stepped onto the stage. The ribbon was in my hand. I planned this wedding, I began, my voice low but steady. The microphone hissed slightly. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. I booked every vendor. I coordinated every minute of your timeline. I restored that dress. My eyes found my mother standing near the archway, her mouth slightly open, a paper cup frozen in her hand. I was there when your first marriage fell apart. I held your hand in emergency rooms, skipped school to pay your bills, stayed up nights reworking lace to bring something old back to life. I raised the ribbon. And you removed this, just like you removed me, quietly. Without a word. Without guilt. The room was still. Even Clara was silent now, her eyes flickering between me and our mother. I don't care if you forget me, I said, my throat tightening. But don't pretend I wasn't part of this. Don't pretend I was never here. My mother stepped forward then, her lips parting. You don't understand, she started. I do, I said, cutting her off. I understand perfectly. I looked at the crowd. Strangers, mostly. But their stares felt different now. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was undeniable. My mother didn't move. Not right away. She stood there, halfway between the exit and the stage, like she wasn't sure which way to run. Her expression flickered between embarrassment and fury, the way it used to when I questioned her version of the truth as a teenager. Clara was the first to speak. Is this really necessary? She said, her voice light but brittle. It's the morning after a wedding, Lena. People are just trying to celebrate. I looked at her then. Really looked. Her face was still painted with last night's makeup, the false lashes slightly askew. She wore a white silk blouse I hadn't seen before, with delicate little pearls sewn into the collar. A gift from my mother, no doubt. She always loved dressing Clara up, making her look like someone worth noticing. "You're wearing the robe," I said softly. "From the bridal suite. Bride's daughter? Was that your idea or hers?" Clara blinked, confused. "What does it matter?" "It matters," I said, holding the ribbon up again. "Because I was her daughter too." The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. And somewhere along the line, I continued, that stopped being enough. My mother took a step forward then, not toward me, but toward control. "You're making a scene," she said through a clenched jaw, her voice low. "Let's talk privately." "Now you want to talk?" I laughed, sharp and small. "Now, when the dress has been worn, the toasts made, the pictures taken without me?" "Lena, please," she hissed. "We can't do this here." "I didn't do this," I snapped, louder than I intended. "You did, when you rewrote the narrative. When you decided one daughter deserved to be seen and the other didn't." Clara flinched. My mother stared at the ribbon in my hand like it might catch fire. "You said she was your heart," I said, turning back to the room. "That she was your real daughter. And maybe she is. But I was there first." I let the words settle. "I was there when you couldn't get out of bed. When you were broke and broken and told me I was the only reason you kept going. I was there before Peter, before Clara, before this performance of a family." Someone, an uncle I think, shifted uncomfortably. The room was starting to move again, a few guests edging out toward the doors, unsure if they were part of a show or an explosion. My mother looked at me, truly looked, and for a second I saw something crack behind her eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I do," I said, and I turned away. I didn't leave right away. I walked off the stage, but I didn't run. I moved through the hall slowly, ribbons still clutched in one hand, the silence parting around me like I was radioactive. Maybe I was. That kind of truth has a way of clearing a room. Some people avoided my eyes. Some stared too long. I saw Clara near the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, her mouth pressed into a line that looked too much like our mother's. She didn't follow me. Neither did my mother. Outside, the air was cool and damp, still heavy with morning dew. The vineyard shimmered in the early light, rows of green stretching out like something eternal. Perfect. Untouched. It was almost cruel. I sat on a stone bench near the rose arbor, the same spot where Clara had taken photos yesterday. I'd fluffed her dress, adjusted her curls, stepped back when the photographer told me to. Now I sat there alone, holding the ribbon. It was a small thing, soft, frayed at the edges from where it had been ripped off the gown. The words were still there, my stitches still intact. But something in me had come undone. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt tired. Not the kind of tired you sleep off, the kind that sits deep in your bones. The kind that comes from years of pretending not to notice you've been erased in real time. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, the door creaked open behind me. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. I didn't turn around. "I didn't know," Peter's voice said gently. That surprised me. Not that he followed me, but that he came alone. "I didn't know what you'd done for this wedding," he said, standing a few feet behind me. "Your mother, she made it sound like Clara handled most of it." I laughed quietly. "Clara chose the napkin color. Everything else?" "I did." He was quiet for a long time. "I saw the ribbon," he said. "The golden one. Before the ceremony. It was beautiful." I looked up at him then. "Then, why didn't you say anything?" His face softened. "It wasn't my place." "It never is," I said. "That's the problem. No one wants to risk the comfort of the lie." Peter nodded slowly. "The way someone does when they've been caught watching something they were never supposed to see?" "You were there," he said finally. "I saw it. Even if no one else did." He turned to leave, then stopped. "She's not a bad person," he added, almost as an afterthought, "but she is scared. Of losing control. Of looking like she needed help." "She did," I said, "and I gave it." He didn't respond. Just walked away, back through the rose-covered archway. I looked down at the ribbon one last time. Then I tied it around my wrist. The reception had bled into brunch. Guests were trickling in again, hungover and overdressed, carrying plates of fruit and miniature quiches like some sort of peace offering to the morning after. Laughter floated on the breeze from the terrace, lighter now, as if the events of earlier had been folded away and stored in a drawer marked awkward family moment. But I wasn't part of that cleanup. I stood just inside the glass doors, far enough to watch without being noticed. My mother sat at the center table, still in cream, surrounded by people who didn't seem to remember, or didn't care, that her daughter had called her out with a microphone less than an hour ago. Clara was next to her. Of course she was, arm hooked through my mother's, head tilted, whispering something that made them both laugh. They looked like a painting, elegant, composed, unbothered. My mother raised her glass for a toast. I should have walked away. But I didn't. She stood, her voice like silk again. I just want to thank everyone for being part of this beautiful weekend. It's been a dream. Truly. Soft applause. A few cheers. She turned slightly, lifting her glass toward Clara. And to my daughter, she said, smiling wide. My heart, my second chance, my joy. You've made me prouder than I can ever say. That word again. Daughter. It slammed into me like a second betrayal, not because she said it, but because she meant it. She looked at Clara like she'd been born from her favorite parts, like the rest of us had never happened. I stepped outside, the golden band still tied to my wrist, the knots pulled tight. It fluttered slightly in the wind. This time, no one tried to stop me. Not one person. They saw me. I know they did. But they looked past me the way they'd been trained to by years of my mother's artful omission. I walked to the far end of the vineyard, where the grass grew high and the sound of clinking glasses faded into birdsong. I stood there, just breathing, just holding space. Behind me, my mother called Clara her real daughter, but I was the one who'd carried her through her darkest hours, and I was done carrying that weight alone. I could have left. I should have. But my legs wouldn't move, not yet. I stood in the tall grass, my shoes sinking into the soft earth, the ribbon on my wrist fluttering like it had something to say. I looked down at it, frayed and dulled from everything it had been dragged through. Kind of like me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from one of the assistants. Do you still want us to invoice your mother? Or should we send it to Peter? I stared at the screen. Invoice her. For what? The hours she pretended I didn't exist? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned back toward the building. The brunch was still going. I could hear the low hum of conversation, a round of laughter that didn't belong to me. The clink of champagne flutes, the life continuing, as if nothing had ruptured. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, hand brushing over the folded paper still in my pocket. The toast I never gave. I don't know why I'd kept it. Maybe some part of me had still believed she would call on me, that she'd remember. Now I knew better. But I also knew this. Silence was a choice, and I wasn't choosing it anymore. I walked back up the gravel path. The doors to the terrace were open. I stepped through them without hesitating. The moment I entered, heads turned. Conversations stopped. I wasn't sneaking in this time. I walked straight to the podium. Someone called my name. Maybe an aunt. I didn't stop. My mother's eyes locked on mine. She rose slowly, alarm already blooming across her face. I picked up the mic. No feedback this time, just my voice, steady, calm. I wasn't supposed to speak today, I said, and the room froze again, the way it had the last time. But I'm going to. My mother took a step forward. Lena, this isn't. No, I said, eyes on her. You already had your turn. I held up the ribbon. This was sewn into your dress. A gift. Not for decoration. Not for tradition. But because I wanted you to remember that I was here. That I mattered. I looked at the crowd. She took it out. Quietly. Like everything else. I let the silence stretch. I planned this wedding. Every table, every song, every flower. And all I wanted was a moment. A moment to be seen. But instead, I got erased. I turned back to her. You gave my place away. You gave it to someone who came second but never had to fight for first. Clara's face paled. My mother's mouth opened. But no sound came. "You keep saying she's your second chance," I said. "Then what was I? Your test run?" And that's when something shifted. I felt it, deep in the silence that followed. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. I stepped away from the mic. No applause, no music. Just truth, sitting thick in the air like smoke. And this time, I didn't wait for permission. I walked out. The front door closed behind me with a hollow click. The weight of the ribbon around my wrist felt heavier than ever, like a chain I wasn't ready to break free from. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the early morning air crisp against my skin. The world was waking up. Birds chirping, cars rumbling, the distant hum of a city that didn't pause for broken families or shattered dreams. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing it all in. I wanted to run, to disappear into the crowd, to let this all go. But I didn't. I wasn't going to vanish quietly anymore. The golden ribbon, once crumpled and discarded, was now a banner I carried with me. Not a symbol of rejection, but of resilience. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Clara. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I stared at it. The words stung, but they didn't stop me. Because I knew something she didn't. I was no longer the shadow in their family portraits. I was the one writing the story now. And I was here to stay. The moment I stepped outside, the air felt colder than it should have been for early spring, sharp against my skin like a silent judgment. I gripped the golden ribbon tightly, the fabric soft from wear but still strong, a small tether to the part of me I refused to lose. The street was quiet, except for the distant hum of morning traffic and the occasional bird breaking the stillness with a song that felt almost mocking. I had nowhere to go, and yet couldn't stand to stay where I'd just been erased, dismissed, as if I had never existed in the story I'd spent my life trying to be part of. I looked down at the ribbon again. It wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was my truth, my proof. I raised my hand and held the ribbon out like a flag, my knuckles white against the weight of what it meant. "You removed this from my mother's dress, like you removed me. Quietly, completely, without guilt." It was a wound disguised as an afterthought, a severed thread in the fabric of my family. But holding it now, I felt something different. Not shame. Not sorrow. Defiance. I was tired of being quiet, tired of shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me, tired of the invisible role I'd been assigned, the helper, the planner, the background noise. I was done pretending my contributions were small. I stepped forward, the ribbon slipping through my fingers and unraveling like a story too long ignored. The cool breeze caught it, making it flutter in the sunlight, catching the eyes of a few early risers who paused, curious. This was my reckoning. Behind me, the wedding hall glowed softly, a beacon of the celebration that had pushed me aside. But I wasn't looking back. The people who had witnessed the staged happiness, the rehearsed smiles, and the whispered exclusions, they might never see me the way I saw myself now. I was more than the daughter who got left out of the photos. I was more than the shadow beneath the bouquets. I was the one who had sewn history into a dress, who had held the family together when it felt like everything was falling apart. I raised the ribbon higher. This was my declaration. I was here. I was seen. And I wasn't going anywhere. My mother's voice came quietly at first, almost a whisper meant only for me, but loud enough to break through the silence that had settled like a thick fog around us. "You don't understand," she said, eyes darting away from mine, searching for something or someone to blame. I folded my arms, the golden ribbon still clutched in my hand like a lifeline. "Try me," I said, my voice steady, refusing to soften. She took a breath, like she was about to confess some long-held secret, then faltered. Her lips parted, closed, then parted again. "Clara needed me," she finally said, the words trembling with something like guilt. "She was lost after the divorce. She needed a mother." I felt a cold surge twist inside me. "And I didn't?" I asked, voice rising just enough to carry the weight of years I'd carried alone. "Was I just a shadow? An inconvenience? A mistake you tried to forget?" Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no apology there. only a quiet admission of a truth that had been buried under years of silence and neglect. "I did what I thought was best," she whispered. "For both of you." "For one of us," I shot back. "You replaced me. You erased me. And now you want to explain it away with excuses?" Her composure cracked. The polished mask slipped, revealing a fractured woman beneath the insecurities, the fears, the jealousy that had driven her to this cruel act. "You don't know what it's like," she said, voice breaking. "To feel invisible in your own family. To watch someone else take the place you wanted so badly." I stared at her, the woman who had shaped so much of my life, both with love and with neglect. "I do know," I said quietly, "because I was there." And I stayed. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, the weight of unsaid words hanging between us. The room seemed to hold its breath. And somewhere deep inside, a crack appeared. Not a healing one, not yet, but a crack. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, the truth could finally start to break through the walls we'd both built around ourselves. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything. The years of being overlooked, the quiet pain of invisibility, the sting of being called just the helper when I was so much more. The golden ribbon twirled between my fingers like a fragile lifeline, and I knew it was time to speak, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been silenced. "I am not your shadow," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. "Not your burden, not your mirror to fix or mold." The room had gone still again. Even the murmurs had faded into an expectant hush. I looked at my mother, who stood trembling, and then at Clara, who was biting her lip like she wanted to disappear. "You've spent so long trying to erase me," I continued, "making me small so you could be bigger. But I am done shrinking." Turning toward the crowd, I spoke to everyone gathered, strangers and family alike. "You can celebrate love today. You can toast to new beginnings and second chances. But don't let the beauty of this moment erase the truth that brought us here." I raised the ribbon high, the sunlight catching on the threads. "This ribbon is more than fabric. It's a reminder that even when you're pushed aside, even when you're forgotten, you are still here. You still exist." Some faces softened, a few eyes glistened. I could see the shift, the uncomfortable acknowledgement that love doesn't always mean inclusion, that sometimes it hides hurt beneath its surface. "I am not here to break you," I said gently. "I am here to break the silence." My mother's shoulders sagged, her defenses cracking, but I didn't look back. I was done waiting for her permission to be seen. I was standing in the light now, and I was claiming my place, for myself, for the girl who stayed when she should have left, for the daughter who refused to be invisible any longer. I turned away, the room still humming with the echo of my words, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I stepped out of the reception hall without looking back. The weight of the golden ribbon on my wrist felt like armor, a small victory wrapped around my skin. The sunlight hit my face, warm and real, unlike the rehearsed smiles and hollow words I'd left behind. No one reached out to stop me. No one called my name or tried to pull me back. The silence wasn't cold, it was clear. I was done waiting for their approval. The street outside was quiet, the morning just beginning to stir. I walked with my head held high, the cool breeze tugging gently at my coat. Each step felt like reclaiming ground I'd lost, years of quiet sacrifice and hidden pain. I passed houses with blooming gardens and children playing, people who had no idea of the battle I'd just fought. For them, it was just another day. For me, it was the first breath of freedom. I paused at a corner, watching the world move without me for a moment. The ribbon caught the light, threads shimmering gold, bright and unyielding. This was mine now. Not just a memory or a broken promise, a symbol of survival. I folded my coat tighter around me and started walking again, alone but not lost. The path ahead was uncertain, messy, maybe even painful. But it was mine, and I was ready. The fallout was immediate and impossible to ignore. Words spread quickly, whispers in hushed corners, sidelong glances over coffee cups, messages passed quietly behind closed doors. My confrontation at the wedding wasn't just a family drama, it became the story no one wanted to forget. At first, the reactions were mixed. Some family members called me brave, sending texts full of encouragement and sympathy. Others were angry, accusing me of ruining what should have been a joyful day. A few stayed silent, their loyalty torn or their discomfort too great to voice. I heard from some distant cousins who admitted they had suspected tensions but never imagined the depth of the fracture. Friends of my mother expressed surprise, saying things like, "I never knew," or "She always seemed so composed." Their words echoed what I already knew: appearances can be deceiving. The groom confronted my mother privately one afternoon, his brow furrowed with confusion and frustration. "What did she mean, Lena? About the dress? About the ribbon?" he asked quietly when we crossed paths at a family brunch a week later. I told him the truth, as much as I could without igniting another firestorm. It was a gift I made for her. Something personal. It was taken away, just like I was. Clara was harder to read. After the ceremony, she avoided me, eyes cast downward whenever we crossed paths. One afternoon, I caught her sitting alone on the porch, fingers nervously twisting the hem of her blouse. "I think I always knew," she whispered when I approached, "that something wasn't right, but I didn't know how to say it." Her words surprised me. For a moment, it felt like a bridge might form between us, fragile, tentative, but real. Still, the damage had been done. Our family, once a web of connections, felt frayed and fragile. Invitations stopped coming my way. Phone calls grew scarce. Even the shared history between me and my mother became a quiet battleground. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, something unexpected began to take root: honesty. For the first time, the fractures weren't hidden beneath polite smiles or forced to be ignored. They were out in the open, painful but undeniable. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward something better. A year later, I found myself in a small atelier tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The shop was modest, just a single room filled with sunlight, rolls of fabric, and the comforting scent of old linens and fresh thread. It was my sanctuary. The walls were lined with mannequins dressed in gowns from every era: delicate Edwardian lace, shimmering flapper dresses, and my favorite, a faded but exquisite Victorian piece that had been my great-grandmother's. Each stitch told a story, each seam a memory preserved in fabric. I had left behind the chaos of that wedding, the tangled family dynamics, and the weight of expectations. Here, surrounded by cloth and history, I was free. I restored each dress with reverence, careful not to erase the past but to honor it. Clients came for more than just repairs. They came for the stories I wove into every thread. A woman brought in her grandmother's wedding gown, worn and yellowed but full of love. A bride sought a veil restored with lace passed down through generations. Each project was a new chapter, a new chance to heal through craft. One afternoon, a young woman hesitated in the doorway, clutching a faded dress that looked fragile and worn. She smiled nervously. "I heard you treat history like it matters," she said softly. "Like it's alive." I smiled back, running my fingers gently over the fabric she'd brought, "because it is." In this quiet space, I had found a legacy beyond family drama. A way to write my own story, stitch by stitch, and create something beautiful from the broken pieces. And for the first time, I felt whole. The atelier's front window became more than just a display. It was a statement. Draped carefully on a vintage mannequin stood the wedding dress I had restored for my mother, now intentionally unfinished. Half the lace was lovingly repaired, the other half left raw and exposed, as if caught in the act of healing. Around the waist, I wrapped the golden ribbon, the one she had thrown away, tied in a loose bow that caught the sunlight like a quiet promise. Embroidered in delicate script along the ribbon were the words I had sewn into it long ago, now visible for anyone who cared to look: "I was there. And I remain." Passers-by often paused, drawn in by the dress's fragile beauty and the story it seemed to whisper. Some lingered, touching the glass, reading the inscription, their eyes softening as if understanding something unspoken. Inside, I worked quietly, my hands steady as I mended torn seams and patched faded fabric. The dress had become my symbol, not just of the family I was born into, but of the identity I was crafting for myself. It was a testament to resilience, to survival, to the courage it takes to reclaim your story when others try to write it for you. Sometimes, a child would press their face against the glass, curious about the shimmering ribbon or the delicate lace. I'd smile and wave, knowing that one day, maybe they'd understand the power of being seen. The dress stood there, half whole, half broken, just like me. But it was mine. And that was enough. A little girl stopped in front of the shop window, her eyes wide as they traced the golden ribbon wrapped around the faded wedding dress. She pressed her small hands against the glass, tilting her head as if listening to the silent story the fabric told. I watched her from inside, a soft smile touching my lips. In that moment, I felt a quiet peace settle over me, a feeling I hadn't known was possible after so many years of feeling unseen. I wasn't erased. Not anymore. I had written myself into the story. Not as an afterthought, not as a shadow, but as someone who mattered. The ribbon caught the light again, glowing softly in the morning sun, a beacon of survival, of presence, of belonging. And as the little girl walked away, her eyes lingering just a moment longer, I knew this was only the beginning. Because I was here. And I was staying.